They get the whole perspective.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Tobacco, community activist, local businessman, someone who joined in fighting for patriotism, freedom, and liberty with all these great men that stand before you. I grew up in Staten Island. I grew up on the sports fields of Staten Island, and we learned that from our parents and coaches that the only thing people hate more than a sore loser is a sore winner. So we're not here today to claim some tremendous victory for Max Pub and spike the football on the governor and the mayor. What we're here for today is to give people an update on what's happening and let small business owners around the country know that the governors and the mayors that are locking us down and crushing small business are not relying on any real science. Just a quick timeline. 1 year ago, Max Pub opened. Danny and Keith took their life savings to open their dream, an Irish pub. 3 months later, they were closed down. For the next 6 months, they were fed a pig's breakfast of junk science and arbitrary, overreaching, tyrannical guidelines that led to them not being able to be open, but a bar right across the street, you can get a beer and a burger. And it pushed them past their limit. On December 2nd, the mayor and governor had enough. They stepped up their intimidation campaign. They came down here and they arrested Danny in his bar for trying to feed his family. The next day I tried to help. I tried to broadcast my TV show from here. The governor's goon squad, the New York City sheriff, threatened to arrest me. When their lawyer stood up for Dan, he was also served with criminal summonses. Our state senator, Andrew Lanza, came down to try to get us out of the jam. He was nearly thrown in handcuffs. The culture of chaos continued, where they try to intimidate and fear people into staying closed. On December 5th, a political ambush was pulled off here by the governor and the mayor's troops, where they tried to frame Danny and make it seem like he was resisting arrest. All of this to turn public opinion against him. As it turns out, I'm not a lawyer, so I could say things a little more clearly. The governor's edict is false. It's fake. Christmas came a day late this year in Staten Island, but right on time for America, because on December 26th, all the fines, all the criminal summonses, all the penalties that were served on Max Pub were dismissed out of hand. In my view, a full admission that the governor's edict has no teeth. Turns out, the governor's edict is much like a Hans Christian Andersen tale, in that we find out right now that the emperor has no clothes. And in that tale, a young man shouted, "He has no clothes." Well, guess what? 2 young men stood up and shouted from the rooftops that this is not fair, this is arbitrary, and this is overreach, and no one was listening. They tried to crush the little man, and the lawyers now are going to tell you why little men and women across the country who own small businesses should take on the government, because every so often the little man wins, like we did here. Now Lou Gelomino, who's representing over 200 restaurants, bars, gyms, salons, in my view, you should all be opening. They'll give you a little more legal advice on that. But Lou Gelomino is going to explain to you why these laws are not enforceable.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lou Gelomino. I'm here to announce today that the city has dismissed every criminal summons they wrote on the night of December 2nd when the sheriffs come crashing into Danny's bar and Keith's bar and wrote out criminal summonses, over 25 criminal summonses to various people that were in the restaurant. Every one of those cases was dismissed by the city today. On Saturday, we got the notices, including the 4 they wrote against me as their attorney. We still have some civil matters to deal with. We're hoping to be heard on those matters very shortly. And as soon as we're heard on those matters, and as soon as the civil matters are cleared up, we will be opening, I believe Danny and Keith will be opening the bar in a legal manner as soon as they can, right after we're heard legally. Just for a note, every client I've had in the last 8 months that's gotten one of these summonses based on the executive order that are returnable in criminal court has been dismissed. Every single one of them. And it goes to show you that the city feels that there's no legal basis as far as criminally to be writing these summonses and creating the chaos they're creating with these summonses to be returnable in criminal court. They're basically saying you're a criminal for opening your restaurant. And the city has dismissed every single one of them on the so far. And hopefully they will continue to do so. If they don't, we will fight them as far as we have to. But I don't think we're going to have to, because I think they're going to dismiss them because they know they have no legal basis to write them. I'll be taking questions afterwards as far as the criminal and civil matters go. Okay.
So, in the middle of all this, as I had mentioned, we reached out to many local leaders, and a few of them stepped forward and got support from Joe Borelli, but no one stepped forward more than my good friend, State Senator Andrew Lanza. Not only did he come down here as a community servant and to find out and help his constituents, but he came down here to my aid when the sheriffs were threatening to arrest me, and he nearly wound up in handcuffs. So I think there's been a failure of leadership, and State Senator Andrew Lanza has been fighting for Staten Island most of his life, and he has a few words for you.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you, John, Lou, everyone here assembled, former Congressman Vito Casella. I just want to sort of take it back a little bit, but add a little more context to this. None of us here are suggesting that we don't want to keep each other safe. We understand the threat that this virus poses to our community, to our state, to our country. And we want to do all we can to keep each other safe. The issue, though, is whether or not the policies, the draconian policies that have been handed down by this state, are even doing that. We look across the country and there are different approaches. We look at states like New York and New Jersey, which has handed down the most draconian, the most arbitrary, the most capricious, the most devastating policies in the country. And if at the end of the day we saw a result where we fared better than other places around the country, we might as a community say, hey, these have been tough, these have been devastating, these edicts have really devastated people, but at the end of the day we've saved lives. Sadly, not only have we been shut down more than any other state, we have lost more than any other state. The result here in New York has been nothing short of a disaster. The death rate in New York and New Jersey is worse than anywhere on earth, not just here in America. So not only have we destroyed people's livelihood, the policies have not saved lives. And then now let's look at some of these policies. And I want you to put yourself, because a lot of people like to draw sides. They like to say, oh, those restaurant owners, those business owners, those salon owners, those barbershops, they're the bad guys. And everyone else, we're just trying to do the right thing here. When you get to hand down rules and are free from even being questioned, that's an awesome power. The kind of power that we weren't supposed to vest in one person in our country. But we have. So let me tell you about these folks, Danny and Keith, and restaurant owners and barbershops. They have families. They want to be free. They want to provide for themselves and their families. They want to provide for their employees. They are the backbone of our economy, and that economy is the backbone of our country. These are people who are desperately wanting nothing more than to work. Imagine this, and the government, rather than, I've heard my entire life about the difference between the liberal, expansive government and the conservative approach. I think a liberal philosophy is a wonderful and beautiful philosophy, as expressed in its purest form, which says, we're going to extend our hand, we're going to help you. We want to be there for you. Sadly, I've watched over the last 9-10 months, and the government has turned from extended hand of help to adversary. The government has been hostile toward its constituents. When the government shows up here on Staten Island and in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens and around the state, it's not to say, Danny Keith, how can I help you provide for your families? They come to harass, to shut down, to shutter, to arrest. For what? Trying to provide for their families? Now let's look at these policies. Again, we want to help each other. We want to protect each other. The governor handed down a rule that the mayor supported that said Danny and Keith cannot have patrons sit inside this restaurant. And right over there, you can see it. You can see it. You can sit down inside and have a meal. We've said all along, show us the science. We'll follow the science. We want to be safe. I've asked now for months, where is the science that supports that kind of policy? Knowing there is no answer, except that there is no science that suggests I can get a haircut on that side of the street, but not on this side of the street. That's why people have lost faith in what's happening here, because they know, deep down, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, everyone knows that there is no science that suggests it's all right to eat across the street in that restaurant and not here. So what would you do? What would you do if you're Danny and Keith watching patrons walk inside a restaurant there and sit down, and you can't do the same here because the government, the governor, or the mayor have said, if you eat inside here, you're a threat to human life. But if you eat over there, it's okay. So think about that. Please think about that before you cast judgment on people who are just trying to survive. Now let's look at what happened here with the sheriffs. I'm a former prosecutor. I worked for the gold standard of prosecutors in America, Robert Morgenthau, in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I can recognize a crime when I see it. I was here for 3-4 days, and I watched what happened. NYPD, they were out in the street as well, and they watched what happened, and they saw no arrestable offense. And then we had the sheriffs. I want the people out there who are listening to you to know the distinction between the sheriffs and the police department. The sheriffs in New York City are not the NYPD. The New York City Police Department is the finest police force on planet Earth. I didn't know a lot about the sheriff's department. I know they were created to confiscate your property and your money. I watched here in horror as they graduated and now happily are willing to confiscate your freedom. That's not why they were created, and that's not their purpose, and that's not what they should be doing. And worse than that, they've showed that they are incapable of doing it properly. You had a restaurant owner sitting inside his restaurant. I watched as 24, 25, 26 uniformed officers from the sheriff's department stood four rows deep guarding this 20-foot wide storefront. With everything going on in this city, the murder rate the highest in 25 years. That's where they were standing right here. Looking to arrest people. Looking to mess with people. A few nights later, we all know the story. They lined the street with unmarked cars, undercover sheriffs. You know, you don't have to be so smart to know what that was all about. You don't have to be so smart to know that the mayor's office put together some kind of rube of a farce, of a policy. You know what that was all about. You want to arrest someone, you stand out here in your uniform, you wait for him to come out, you put him under arrest like you did the last time. What was that all about? What was it all about? We know what it was all about. It was a farce. They knew the narrative was turning against them. They knew that people were saying, hey, what the hell's going on here? And they said, we've got to put this down, and we've got to put it down fast. And that's what they did, and they entrapped one of our citizens for doing nothing more than trying to provide for themselves. The guy jumps on the hood of a car, They even stopped doing that in the movies. Ridiculous. And we know why they did it. And we know what this is all about. Now, thanks to the lawyers, Lou, Marconte, Mr. Camarada, everyone, the courts, luckily. You know, we're witnessing what I believe to be a good day for freedom and liberty. I think it's apropos that we're standing here. Congressman Fasella reminded me of this. We're standing here on Lincoln Avenue. Lincoln Avenue. You know, 100 years or so, Abraham Lincoln questioned whether or not the American experiment was going to survive. He asked whether or not a nation conceived in liberty could long endure. He saw the Civil War as a great test of that experiment. And a lot of us around the country have been wondering whether or not that experiment would long endure, given what we're watching outside our windows, both here on Staten Island, across the state, and across the nation. Can a nation conceived in liberty, the greatest experiment on earth that transferred power from government to the people, could we remain free? Will we remain free? A lot of us have asked the question as to whether or not that would happen. Well, I tell you this, appropriately here on Lincoln Avenue, I think the spark has been ignited here that I pray and hope will rekindle that spirit of freedom and liberty. As John Tobacco said, little guys across the country are wondering, is the government so big? Is it so oppressive? Is it so tyrannical that my freedom is lost, my American dream is gone? Or do I have a chance? And if I do, what can I do? Well, you might take a page out of the book of Danny and Keith here. You might want to stand up. I think it's time to stand up for freedom and liberty. And I thank these two gentlemen, these lawyers, and the people of Staten Island for really sparking that movement, which I think is going to lead to greater a return to liberty and turning back the tide of oppression that we see here in the state. Again, we want to be safe. We want rules and laws that do that and not destroy families. Thank you.
All right, and finally, the man you all want to hear from Mac himself, Keith McElhonney, wants to give you some idea of what's happening with the future of Mac.
Good morning, everybody. I have to write things down. I'm not as eloquent as these guys. We are still staying the course. We took on the overreach, intimidation, and financial ruins, but we are still staying the course. These rulings are proof positive that all along, these Emperor's edicts were nothing but hot air, and there is no legal basis for taking away our constitutional freedom and liberties. I'm hoping not just in Staten Island or New York, but around the country where tyranny and overreach are ruining family and businesses will follow our lead and stand up, rise up, and open up. I can tell you firsthand, it can get rocky. But if you stay the course, you can win. I told you last time, and I've been saying since the beginning, that this governor and mayor will not take away my dream or my bar. The dream is still alive. Thank you.
This is the unedited version. It will go on every platform that I can put it on.
I apologize, and I don't say this lightly. Again, as a former prosecutor, what I watched out here from the New York City Sheriff's Department is appalling. I don't blame the rank and file, hardworking men and women doing their job, following orders. But I have to tell you, if you're going to be a lieutenant in the Sheriff's Department, or if you're going to be the sheriff himself, you ought to be vaguely familiar with the law. Sadly, I saw that they are not. They were dishonest, they were arbitrary, and they were wrong. And again, I don't say this lightly, but we need a change in leadership. The sheriff, Mr. Facito, needs to go. He ought to resign.
Very good. All right, that's all. If you guys have any questions for the attorneys, Joe Camarada,
Specifically, what has been dismissed and what still remains?
There were 20 summonses to various people given by the sheriffs to be returnable in criminal court. Basically, they charged them with misdemeanors. All 20 of those summonses, including the ones for myself, including the ones for the bar, including the ones for everybody in the place, have now been dismissed.
Civilly, what remains? Fines and things like that?
Civilly, maybe my friend Joe Camerata can answer that question.
Joe Camerata on behalf of 128A, separate distinct facility than 130. I represent John Tobacco and his new studio, which is housed inside 128A. Civilly, where we're at procedurally is under the cover of darkness on December 11th, 2020. We witnessed the city of New York try and go for interim, immediate emergency relief in the Supreme Court of New York in the county of Richmond. That happened about 4:30, between 4:30 and 5 p.m. on a Friday night. What they tried to do was obtain a temporary restraining order, a temporary closure order, and sought a preliminary injunction to essentially close between 128, 128A, and 130. 130 being the bar. 128 is a Chinese restaurant and my client's new studio. And what's important to note is they did not name Mr. Tobacco or his new studio as a defendant, but they mentioned him in the papers, and that was an underhanded tactic to attempt to stifle the speech and free press of Mr. Tobacco and his new studio. They tried to come in on the cover of darkness and trample the constitutional First Amendment rights of the American citizens. We're not going to stand for that. So where we are that night, the judge denied that relief. Mr. Tobacco is freely operating as he should under the Constitution. His new studio at 128A, he's getting the word out, not just for Max, but for the citizens of this country and the people of this community. And the next step is they are trying to still obtain a preliminary injunction. So we beat them at the first term. I'm confident we're going to beat them at the second term. And then once that's done, we will deal with getting the lawsuit dismissed. So civilly, there are multiple steps.
So what remains for keeping this place closed
Right now, what remains is some of the civil violations as far as the health department and the building department. They know, the city knows that they couldn't prevent people from going in. So what they did was get some bogus building department violations that still have to be cleaned up, and some health department violations that have to be cleaned up. And they're all bogus. We can do that immediately. We also have this nuisance hearing that we have to deal with. We're going to be dealing with that sometime in January. As soon as those things are cleaned up, it's my belief that Danny and Keith intend to open their bar in a legal manner.
It's still an orange zone, though, right?
Yes.
So that technically it's still not allowed to reopen.
As of right now, no. Here, you can open there. My colleagues and I have separate lawsuits to deal with that. We have 2 pending in federal court. We have 1 pending in Erie County, which I think a lot of you reported on. The judge up there ruled that the state has to show by Monday either a compromised position to open restaurants up in Erie County, or they have to show the science. We're actually awaiting that. We brought those lawsuits here in New York City, and they were rejected 4 months ago. Hopefully we have a judge in Erie County that has the courage to make those tough decisions.
So you're not opening up today?
We're not opening
So
up
what
today.
changed from the press release you guys sent out saying it was a big grand reopening?
Well, I don't think there was anything in the press release that said we were opening up today, so we're going to reopen as soon as possible.
Okay. And then also, I understand the frustrations of them being able to open up and you guys not being able to open up. But right now, across New York City, indoor dining is banned. What makes you guys so special that you think, playing devil's advocate here, that you guys can open up? Everyone else, you're trying to open up.
I'm
I'm a lawyer.
I'm gonna give you public opinion because I'm not a lawyer and I don't have to parse words. It's bullshit. That's why. And we're not special. We're like everyone else. There's a thing called pluralistic ignorance. That's when everyone privately thinks this is crazy, but when they go out in the streets and no one's saying this is crazy, they just follow the crowd. So the crowd has to start realizing that orange zones and red zones and yellow zones, these are figments of an emperor's imagination. And no one should have to be answering to them about which side of the street you can have a burger on, because that's not America.
I don't think it should be couched. I don't think it should be
It's a very
couched
good,
that way.
it's a very good question.
I mean, it makes sense.
I-
Everyone, you know,
Good
this
on
is what
you.
everyone's
Yeah,
saying.
everyone.
People are thinking
It's a great
you're coming
it's a
forward,
great
you're saying,
question.
We're gonna open up.
Yeah.
People are dying still. You
Yeah.
guys want to open up to have a beer. I understand it's your dream. We all have dreams. I get it. But this, you made it mention, it's a serious
Yeah. It's
problem.
serious.
It's a global pandemic.
Yeah.
It's a deadly pandemic.
Great
And
question.
you guys want to have a beer.
No. Great question.
Not about a beer.
Great question. So first, hold on. It's a good question. It's a good question. So first of all, no one here is saying we're special. That's number one. No one is saying this restaurant. No one is saying this restaurant ought to open and other restaurants. Please for a second. No one is saying that this restaurant ought to open and others should not. That's number one. What is the message here is show us the science. You said people are dying. The health commissioner of the state of New York, the health commissioner of the city of New York have said people are not dying because they're dying. So they've said that. They've said that the lowest transmission rate in terms of group activity is restaurants. This is the government. This is
You're right about that.
right. This
It's
is the
at
mayor.
home, it's what
This is
they're
the
saying
mayor.
happening.
This is the governor. This is the state and city health commissioners have all said people are not dying because of
But
restaurants.
they can't regulate.
Well, let me
inside
finish
people's
answering the
homes.
question.
Like, these are things
Let me
they
finish
could do
answering.
to help
Well,
beat this pandemic.
listen, you can listen. You can regulate a lot of things. It doesn't mean you ought to. It ought to be based on science. It ought to be based on the stated purpose, which is to protect people's lives. And we look around the countries where there are not lockdowns and they have lower mortality rates. And let me go back to the governor, the mayor, and the state and the city health commissioners have said restaurants are not the danger. Now you say, well, there's an orange zone now in all of New York City. Yes, and you know why that happened? Think about what happened here just before that. We said the proof that there is no science here, that these laws are arbitrary and capricious, is that this restaurant is closed and that one is not. Not mysteriously. 3 days later, it was declared that the whole city is an orange zone to deal with the question that we posed. Now, do you think on Monday when they changed the whole city to orange that the science changed? It did not. It further proved our point, which is there's no science. All we ask for, and all the people deserve, is the science that says the policies are actually effective. And they themselves have said restaurants are not the problem.
Any other questions? Any other questions? And Mike, what's up, Mike?
Danny, welcome to the microphone, Danny. All around the city, we're seeing restaurants building huts outside of their restaurants, fully enclosed, essentially smaller restaurants on the street, which are essentially indoors outside of their restaurants. Is that frustrating for you as a business owner to see these, what the lengths that these businesses are forced to go to essentially create indoor dining out on the street?
It's completely frustrating. One thing that this has been about, it hasn't always just been about Max Public House or us feeling special or feeling that we deserved anything more than anybody else. The stance we have taken is for all small businesses, not just Max Public House. And it's frustrating because they're coming under attack with their outdoor dinings because you're saying you have to be outdoors, so they create outdoor so people can end up enjoying themselves, and then you keep on moving the goalpost on these guys. Every single time they do something to adapt, to try and provide for their families, they change it because they do adapt and they are survivors. And then the next thing you do, you change the goalpost on these guys and you end up slamming them with threats of taking their licenses away and everything. And it's completely frustrating, and that's about all I have.
I'd like to just point something out. I'd like to point something out. You can go over to Nassau County, you can go to Westchester County, you can go to Suffolk County. They have higher rates than us, and they're open. That's like saying, let this half of the news do their job, and you go sit in the corner because you are being picked on by the governor. We wouldn't let that happen to you. We don't want that to happen to all of us. Not just us, the restaurant in general.
Where are you from? Where are you from?
Any other questions?
Where are you from? Okay, you asked enough questions.
Inactive liquor license.
Yeah.
How are you guys gonna open up without an active license?
We're working
We'll let
on
you know.
getting the
We'll let you know. We'll let you know.
Working on getting
police officer,
Not bad.
100 yards. What's going on with that case? What's going on with your case with 100 yards? Dragging the police officer on the road.
The criminal court case we're still working on. We hope to get that dismissed somewhere down the road.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Excuse me?
Follow up on the reopening. You want to reopen, but nobody else can reopen. When would you reopen?
We want everyone to reopen.
Let's make this perfectly clear. I have been in the front of this fight for 9 months. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Restaurants from all over the city started calling me because I knew I was representing anybody that got in trouble or anybody that received summonses for free, and I'm still am. I have received literally thousands and thousands of calls in the last 9 months. I'm not exaggerating one little bit, from restaurants all over the city that want to open and do the same exact thing. They're in different circumstances than Danny and Keith. We are fighting for all of the restaurants, and we don't expect any kind of special treatment. We have brought lawsuits. We're hoping those lawsuits are going to be heard in the next 2 weeks, and we're confident that one of those lawsuits is going to win, and a judge is going to say, show us the science, because according to the government, only 1.4% of the transmission is from restaurants. That's it. You guys can look that up yourself. That's from the state. If Target could be open, you guys must have shopped during Christmas, all right? Target, Walmart, the lines were out the door. There were people standing side by side. They didn't close them. So why use the restaurants as the scapegoat for everything? I don't know.
Any other questions?
No questions.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Kev, you good? It's not shocking that CBS News is the one hawking the attorneys. It's not shocking. That's where all the limousine liberals live. But the fact of the matter is they don't understand the plight of a regular guy who's trying to feed his family. So most of us, we're going over to New Jersey to watch our kids play sports and have an indoor meal. So Governor Murphy and all the restaurants there are making a ton of dough, while Cuomo and de Blasio are killing small businesses. Does anybody have anything else?
I think there was an article in the paper yesterday, and I think there was a segment on your show, on your network, that showed that the restaurants in Newark, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in Nassau were overflowing with New Yorkers. How can the virus be stopped at some type of random border? That's the issue. That is the issue. The issue is the hypocrisy of the whole thing. That's it.
And I have one last question for you, for the folks over at CBS, and for everyone really.
Why are you
for
targeting CBS?
You asked 17 questions and you didn't say the same thing. Yeah.
I'm not targeting you, I'm asking a question. If you feel that you're being targeted, then you've asked me questions. I don't feel that I'm being targeted. I welcome the questions, and I have a question